Return with me this morning to Colossians chapter 1, and we are continuing to work our way through this great Christological passage that the apostle has left us in this letter. I hope you're beginning to appreciate really just how deep Paul goes with this, making these profound statements that he does on the nature of Jesus, who is, of course, the very image of the invisible God and the firstborn of all creation. This passage structurally begins with this profound statement of the nature of who Jesus is as both the God-man, the God who is the God-man, the image of the invisible God, as well as the firstborn of all creation. And as we saw last week, he is also the creator of all things, the one who has established all that is. And then as we move along, we will see him as the sustainer, and we will see him as the reconciler as well as we continue on. So what we have here is an apologetic. This is Paul's defense, that's what the word means, defense of Jesus as the fullness of the nature of God himself. How do you defend the nature of Jesus? How do you defend the God-man as being fully the invisible God? How do you do that? Well, Paul's method would be to go and to assert that Jesus is, in his divine nature, the Son of God, the creator of all things. There are those who would want to say, well, what Paul means by the second half of verse 15 is that, he's just a part of creation, and so therefore we should honor him as some sort of deified man. But Paul defends the eternality of the Son of God by demonstrating him as the creator. He cannot be a part of the creation because he created all things in heaven and on earth. He's the creator of all physical and spiritual realities. He's the creator of the physical world that we live in, that we can explore, as well as the spiritual plane above us that's occupied by spiritual beings. He's the creator of all levels of creation. But Paul goes even further by noting that Jesus isn't just the creator of the various planes, but he's also the creator and establisher of all authorities within those planes. So whatever authority exists in the spiritual planes amongst the angels is created by Christ. And whatever authorities exist in this world, in this sphere, amongst the nations, in the church, in the home, wherever, are all from him. They're delegated from him. He created them. So Paul asserts that a proper understanding of the nature of the Christ assumes that he was involved in actions that can only be ascribed to an eternal person of God himself. Only an eternal, non-corporeal person could be the one that created all things. That's what Paul is asserting. Actions that can only be undertaken by the Creator himself demonstrate to us that Jesus is fully the Christ, fully the image of the invisible Christ. So as we continue our way along in this great passage, Paul is now going to assert that Jesus is more than just the Creator. Yes, he's the one who created, and he established powers and authorities in the creation, but Paul is going to go on further now to assert that this creation has purpose in him. That this creation has purpose in him. You will notice at the end of verse 16 that Paul adds a little simple phrase, and for him. I did say last week, didn't I, that this little phrase is going to require a whole sermon? Well, here we are. Let me remind you of what he says in verses 15 and 16. He is the image, that is Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him, that is by Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And I don't want you to miss that little piece at the end. The little phrase for him in the Greek is a little two-word phrase, eis autos, and it is a phrase that has a pretty well, we can figure out what it means. It means unto the purpose for which he has determined. Unto the purpose for which he has determined. All right, so let's consider this. To understand that phrase, it's probably good for us to consider the fact that Paul uses language here that's almost identical, well, actually it is identical, to what you see at the end of Romans chapter 11, verse 36. For from him and through him and to him are all things, to him be glory forever. Paul uses that same phrase, to him, or for him. Now, most translations use the word to in Romans 11:36 and use the word for in this verse, even though it's the same Greek phrase. I don't know why. Don't have an explanation. It just seems easier in English, apparently, to use it one way or another. But the underlying preposition is the same in both places. It's eis, followed by a pronoun, autos, him. Okay, we would translate it him. It's in the masculine form, so we translated him. In other words, Paul is communicating here the same idea that he does there in Romans 11:36, that everything was created through him. We see that here, through him, and for him. The through him part Paul's already described. He did it. It was through him. It was through his specific actions and purposes and intentions. It was through him that he accomplished it. In fact, nobody really ever denies that reality of the word through. So Paul seems to be asserting the same thing here that he's asserting there by using through him and to him. Now, I will note that Paul does skip the from him here. It's from him in 11:36, so it's from him and through him and to him, but Paul skips the from him. But it's really not skipping it. If you consider verses 15 and 16 in general are all from him. It's the point he's making. Verse 15 is he is the image of the invisible God, and from him he created. So it really doesn't require him to say from him here because he's already been saying that. He asserts it, that all things are coming from his divine decree and purpose. From him implies that it's something that God himself intended, purposed. We would prefer to use the word decreed, established as a decree over all things. However, the statement of verse 15 clearly implies that the Son of God, in his divine eternal nature as the image of the invisible God, can be the only one to have made such a choice. There is none other that can be established as the one for this. You'll notice how specific Paul is being. Him, specifically him. And you remember I said at the beginning of this series that the pronouns all point to one particular person, and that one particular person is defined for us earlier in the letter. So the natural question is, all right, what does Paul mean when he says that all things are for him or to him, whichever word you want to use to translate eis? The preposition eis has a very wide semantic domain. It has many, many different definitions depending on its use. In fact, it's used 1,600 times or more in the New Testament. It's a very popular little preposition. It's part of the English, it's part of the Greek language, just like the word the is a part of ours. Or now in the 20th century, like. It's become a part of our language. Started somewhere in Southern California and now it's in everybody's vocabulary. I was yesterday, doing like. So this word, because it is such a wide semantic domain, we have to figure it out contextually. There are some simple definitions of this word as it would be used in just common parlance, simple like to and in and into and for and at, just those simple kinds of words that connect other words together just to make sense out of language. But it also has complex meanings, interestingly enough. It can mean things like among, or so that, or by means of, or with reference to, or to the point of. And by the way, all of those are ways it's used in the New Testament. You can find examples of all of those different kinds of ways, these complex ideas, that this is a word meaning things like among or so that or by means of or whatever. So it's not just a simple little word, that simple little preposition that connects together words. It has complexity in how it's used throughout the New Testament. So, as I said, the only way we're really going to understand it is to look at it contextually. You have to say, okay, how is this word being used in this particular context? How does the word operate in the specific place it's being used? In this case, as you can see, it follows dia autos. Dia meaning through, autos, him. So dia autos, eis autos. All right, so it's from him, through him, and then to him. So we would have to look at this two-word phrase in the light of dia autos, being what's immediately before it. So the word has the connotations of that which goes towards the one through whom it came. Through him, to him. See it? The context would have to be, if something is through him and then immediately it's to him, then we would assert that whatever is through him is back to him again. Since the phraseology. So we would look at verses 15 and 16, what Paul's been talking about here, right? And we would remind ourselves that all things come from, through, the image of the invisible God. Okay, so we go back to verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, and all things are created through him. So we would assert that this word through him implies that all things are coming through this one who is the image of the invisible God. They're all coming from him and through him. And so everything is through him by an explicit creative action. An explicit creative action on the part of this one. In other words, Paul is asserting, as you can definitely tell in verses 15 and 16, that the Son of God, the image of the invisible God, purposed to make all things. And he did so not by accident or as a side effect, but directly by virtue of his power, his nature as the invisible God. So therefore, everything is through him by explicit creative action. Therefore, it stands to reason that everything that's through him, therefore, has purpose back to him. It starts with him going forth as though it comes through him, but the natural point is why? Well, it has an intention coming back to him. So if you were to draw this on a whiteboard, if I had a whiteboard here, I'd draw on one side, I'd draw the word decree, God's intention, God's in purpose, what he has in mind, and draw an arrow to creator in the middle. Here's the creator. The intention of a creator. And then I would write the word creation over here. And our natural tendency would be to draw an arrow that way to the creation. But in this context, the arrow is actually coming back this way. So the decree points to the creator. The creation points back to the creator. It is through him and it is to him. See it? It's coming back to him. The creation was created for a purpose in him. That's what Paul is implying with eis autos after dia autos. Through him, to him. That's where he's going. It's a simple little phrase, as I said, but you have to stop and think about what it is that Paul is trying to say with that for him at the end, or to him. It is coming back to him. So that, or to the point of him being the purpose of creation itself. Now, you will notice that I stand opposed in saying that to the common thinking of ordinary men. Because what is the purpose of creation in the minds of ordinary men? Us. Okay? Us. Everything is created by the Son of God for his own glory. Now, I'm lifting that from Romans 11:36. I'm going to 11:36 back to that same phrase. For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory. Okay, so Paul is clearly implying, doesn't say it here, but he clearly knows this to be the case in his other writings, that he believes that this creation is purposed by him, through him, and to him for his glory. He is the one that is glorified. The firstborn of all creation that we saw in verse 15 is now given teeth. And that is, he's the firstborn of all creation, meaning that everything about creation is about him, coming back to him. All things are created by him so that they might be for him. See? So, we must ask the question at this point then. And the question is, all right, what does it mean that all things are for Jesus' glory as the Son of God and the firstborn of all that creation? What does that mean? What is that we deal with here? So there's three different answers to that question. One unlikely answer, one possible answer, and one probable answer. All right, so let's look first at the unlikely answer to our question. What does it mean that everything is for him? The unlikely is that everything exists simply as Christ's own, meaning that he has ownership over the creation and therefore can treat it as his own plaything, or he can simply let it be in some way. In other words, it's for him, he created it, and now he owns it. So it's simply his. Now, that would be true in a large sense, right? I mean, we recognize he's creator. But what I mean by this is in the sense in which he created it just in order to say, I own this. I'm not really doing anything with it, but I own it. It's mine. And I could do with or without within it whatever I want to do without or within in it. Reminds me, as I was writing this particular part of it, it reminded me of an old Twilight Zone episode from years ago where this couple wakes up in a strange bedroom after a night of partying a little too hard, and they don't know where they are, and they're running around this town that doesn't have any people in it, and suddenly they realize that they are the playthings of this very large child over them, that their father has caught a couple of humans and brought them and put them in his playhouse. That's not what Paul means by this. Now, I realize that this is sort of the deistic view that's so very prevalent in our world today, that God created the world and then simply lets it run, quote unquote, right? The deistic view, which is very, very popular amongst us, that human beings, as the pinnacle of creation, are given the freedom to do with this planet as we please. It's ours. We get to figure it out, right? We get to do what we want to do with it. It is for him in this sense, in that he purposed this world to simply be where we would exist, free to look to him if we so desire, or to reject him if we would so desire. The glory of Christ would then simply be the creation itself, with its attendant beauty and order and efficiency and massiveness, etc., as though he created it and then stood back and went, wow, look what I did. And this is mine. I created this. Oh, and I've created people in it. And they're just free to do as they wish. Now, you might look at that as rather absurd, but that's really very prevalent thinking amongst evangelicals, that this is a world that God simply set in motion. He created it and then set us loose in it, and it's just our playground, that we can just do what we want to. The problem with that, of course, is that the scriptures speak far too highly of a sovereign decree of God over his creation to simply assume he created it simply for itself, as though the creation holds its own glory, as though the creation is a glory unto itself, right? Listen to what Paul says in Ephesians 1, by the way, the greatest passage in Scripture on the decree of God. In him we have obtained an inheritance. That is, in Christ we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will, so that we who were the first to hope in Christ might be to the praise of his glory. See it? The decree is spoken of there as something in which the creation has a purpose, but that purpose is to draw men to the glory of the Creator, not to the glory of the creation or to the glory of man, but to draw us to the glory of God, or more specifically, the glory of Christ who created all things. And the fact that most evangelicals have no decree in their theology leads them to the conclusion that this world is simply something that God created and it has whatever glory it has within it on its own. In other words, to treat the creation as simply something that gives Christ glory by extension. It has glory, and therefore Christ is glorified because the creation is filled with glory. So that is unlikely. If you're going to believe that there's a decree, as Ephesians 1 says, it is unlikely that the Son just created this world for himself as some sort of object of glory. As though he said, let me just see what I can do here. Oh, I got an idea. Platypus. This will be cool. So that's an unlikely answer to our question, what does it mean that this world is created for him? But there is a possible answer to this in that the creation was established for the firstborn of that creation to enter into it himself. Now, I'm willing to consider this answer in that the Son of God created the world so that he could enter into it in the incarnation. That he established it in order that he would enter into it. He formed a world simply to enter into it himself and be glorified as the preeminent human in that world. Okay, so that's reasonable and certainly possible. It is for him in that he purposed this world to be the place into which he himself would enter to accomplish the salvation of an elect people within that world. So he creates and then intimately forms man from the dust of the ground in order to enter into the world and become like the creature he has created, in order to do what that creature failed to do. The glory of Christ then in this answer would be simply his incarnation to the purpose of completing the divine decree of saving a people. All right, so we accept the idea that there's a decree, and so the Christ creates this world in order to accomplish what his Father has purposed, and so he creates this world and then enters into this world and accomplishes the redemption of a people. Like I said, that's a perfectly reasonable and possible explanation for what it is that Paul is saying when he says that this world was for him. Think of for him in the sense of it's for his entry into it. Now, as I said, it's reasonable. The point Paul is making is that Jesus is the preeminent one. He's the firstborn of this creation. Thus, the creation exists for the purpose of him entering into it, to take on the role of a savior within this world, to create this world in order to save the world. To create this world in order to save the world as his glory. Now, I think this is a perfectly reasonable explanation for what he says. I wouldn't deny that. Certainly true. One particular difficulty with this is is liberal Christianity. When I say liberal Christianity, I mean the kind of Christianity that existed in the early 20th century that abandoned sola scriptura in favor of more esoteric man-centered theology, would use this particular description and twisted it, suggesting that Christ came into this world to act as an example, or more of an example than as a savior. So combining my first definition and second, or my first answer and second answer, that the Christ created this world in order for it to be a place for us, and then he glorified himself by entering into it in order to demonstrate to us what we're supposed to be doing in this world. That's where liberal Christianity goes. It changes the nature of the gospel into a message of we're the creatures created in the image of God as humans. Therefore, we are the pinnacle of creation, and therefore the gospel is supposed to be how we relate to one another and how we help one another and how we solve the human problems that exist in this world because of sin. And Christ came as some great example to us as to how we are supposed to treat one another. So they would be taking this idea of Christ entering into the world in order to finish the decree of God and twist it into saying, well, the decree of God is how we are supposed to relate to one another and how we're supposed to deal with one another. Which is why, by the way, you hear very little about sin and judgment and wrath and condemnation in that liberal worldview, because it really doesn't have anything to do with that. It only has to do with how we treat each other and being kind and nice to one another and trying to help each other. And now we've taken it to a brand new art in this century, where we've now turned it from the social gospel into the social justice gospel. But it's the same gospel. It's a false gospel. Now, true, Paul will emphasize the reality of Christ entering into his world in order to do what it is that he was purposed to do. You will see that in verses 18 to 20, that Christ's work in the world he created is to reconcile all things to himself. So certainly it's reasonable to conclude that Christ created this world in order for him to enter into it. Like I said, it's perfectly reasonable explanation of the answer to my question. What does Paul mean when he says it's for him? It's entirely reasonable to conclude that the Son of God created this world for himself as a place into which he would enter. It would become the place of his preeminence. Not for the purpose of just being some sort of example, as those who twist the gospel claim, but coming to accomplish an atonement that would be his glory. To come into the world to accomplish an atonement that would be his glory. Now, that's perfectly reasonable and understandable, and we would all nod our heads in agreement. Yes, that's right. He came into this world to accomplish an atonement. He entered into this world in order to satisfy the requirements of the divine decree, to accomplish what the Father and the Son and the Spirit had purposed in eternity past to accomplish. And so it would be perfectly reasonable to say that the answer to this question is that this creation is for him so that he could enter into it and his preeminence would be found in his nature as a man. He would be the firstborn of all creation. Come into this world and accomplish what it is that God has set him to do. The creation is for the Son of God to be glorified as a man within this creation. Jesus then, the God-man, becomes that glory incarnate. So it's for him in the sense that all of this was created that he might enter into it and accomplish a purpose. Now, none of us can deny that, right? I mean, that's perfectly reasonable conclusion. As I said, that's a possible answer to this question. What does Paul mean when he says this creation is for him? It is for him in that it was created that he might enter into it and that he might accomplish the decree in time and space in this particular world. So I would say that this answer to the question is subtext. True. Very true, but subtext, because you all sitting there waiting for me to pull the trigger on the third one, right? You're thinking to yourself, he said there were three. He said there was an unlikely, a possible, and then a probable, all right? So I'm not denying in any sense that Christ created this world in order to come and be glorified as the God-man. You can't escape that as being true. But is it really what for him ultimately means? And I would argue it does not. What ultimately comes is that the creation is the means by which the whole of the Son of God is glorified. And that's bigger than just him entering into it. Now, again, the Son of God was certainly glorified as the God-man, right? Entering into the creation, taking on the role of human flesh, living in this world as a man without sin, going to the cross, bearing the wickedness of men, and then being raised from the dead, great act of glory, ascending from this world into the spiritual plane again as his exaltation, and so forth. No doubt of that at all. But I would suggest that his glory through creation is far more than just creating the world, becoming a man, and making atonement. And here's why. Now listen carefully to this statement. The divine decree, that decree of God in eternity past to do something out of his own nature as God, and the gospel, which gives flesh and bone to that, if you will, the gospel, as an extension of the divine decree of God, is about more than saving people. Let me say that again, because it's so very radical to how people think today. The divine decree of God, the decree of God to create a world, send his son into that world, that son dies in that world, that son rises in that world, that son makes atonement and satisfaction for a people and then is exalted to the right hand of God. That creation is, that decree, is more than about saving people. Saving people is certainly a part of it, but it's not the primary part of it. It's not the primary intention of it. Now, again, most of us coming out of other traditions would look at that and go, well, I thought the gospel was all about us getting saved. Isn't that the point of this creation? Isn't the point for Christ to create this world and then see it fall into sin and then come and save a people out of it? Isn't that the intention of what it is that God did? Well, it certainly is a part of it, but it's not the whole of it. I would argue that this word to him is far, far more than just this world being created so that he would come and save a people. It's more than that. It's the means through which the totality of God's purpose is revealed in and through itself. The creation is the means that God has chosen through which to bring the fullness, the totality of his purpose to bear. Salvation is a part of it, no doubt of that. But it's not all of it. It's not all of it. Let me give you just two examples out of the book of Romans to help you see this. Paul's very clear, I think, about this. In Romans chapter 9, Paul argues that the patience of God over reprobate people, and I'm summarizing what he's saying in some of those verses, that the patience of God over reprobate people is so that both his mercy and his justice can be made known. Both his mercy and his justice can be made known. The fullness of the character of who God isn't just in saving people, but it's also in bringing justice to bear over every injustice that has ever been done. To bring justice to bear. Out of his nature as a God who is perfectly just. The God who is able to be both just and the justifier. God's intention isn't just to save a people, but it's also to deal with all of those who are not being saved. All of those who are not being given the grace of God. See? Paul says it's more than just about saving the people. There's a greater intention beyond that. In Romans chapter 8, going back just a chapter, Paul makes another assertion in asserting that the entirety of creation is groaning, waiting for its redemption. It isn't just the elect that are groaning and waiting for their redemption. The whole of creation is groaning and waiting for its redemption. All of this thing that the Son of God created is groaning. And so Paul's point is, it's not just about Jesus coming into the world and saving some people and thus being glorified as the one who rose from the dead and ascended to the right hand of the Father. Certainly that brings him glory. But the glory is far greater than that, in that Christ has come not just to bring some people to himself, but rather to accomplish the redemption of the entire creation itself. As I said, the creation is the means by which the totality of God's intention, better, all of God's nature is glorified through this thing called the creation. So the most likely understanding of this word "to him" or "for him" is that the work of the Son is to create the world to accomplish all that God intended. And he, the God-man, will be the object of that glory as it is all consummated. As everything is accomplished. Even the destruction of the wicked will bring glory to this Christ, this Son of God, who created all things. For example, in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 31, Jesus tells us it is the God-man who will sit upon the throne of glory. The glory of the decree, when all things are finished, when it's all done, when it's all said and done, when everything is wrapped up, when this world is finally finished and all of what Christ intended to be is finished, he will sit upon the throne of glory, and the glory of the decree will finally come when everything is completed from when it started. It doesn't start, the intention, I should say, doesn't start when God spoke the first bit of energy into being, when he said, "Let there be light." It's not when it starts. That would be the beginning of the world as we know it, but not the beginning of the intentions and purposes of God as he knows it. For he has purposed in himself, by virtue of his own decree, from eternity past, to accomplish something. And that is to glorify his only begotten Son. To elevate him to the position of the throne of glory. The decree of God certainly does include our salvation in it as a part of this plan, but it's not the totality of the plan. Soteriology is only a part of the entire decree. It also includes eschatology, which means how it is accomplished. I remind people, as I did when we did our theology lecture some years ago, that eschatology is not limited to how things go in the future. Eschatology began in the mind of God before the foundation of the world as he himself accomplishes what he wills. And everything that comes to pass is a part of the eschatological framework of what he is accomplishing until that day comes when the Son gives to his Father a completed work. And the Son says, "Here, I have done all that you have asked of me to do." And he sits down on the throne of glory. The true glory of Jesus is found in his work in all of the elements of the decree. Not the elements of creation. The elements of the decree. And I listed a number of them here in my outline. All of them ending in shun. Ordination. Ordination of what? The plan of God in eternity past to ordain all that would come to pass. All that would take place within the framework of this world. Everything that comes to pass. God ordained it all. Including his own Son entering into this creation to live as a man. Creation, what we've been talking about. Preservation. The ongoing work of the Son of God to preserve all that is. We're going to talk about that in the next few verses. Humiliation. The downward steps of the eternal Son of the living God into human form. The awesome humiliation of the infinite God, knowing no bounds, entering into the womb of a virgin and taking on the likeness of a finite man. Incarnation, of course, the entry of the very Son of God into this world as a man. Redemption, of course, the whole plan of God to save a people by virtue of what he's going to do. But then even his exaltation. Not just ascending to heaven, but ascending back to his position where he sits upon his throne and rules over the nations of the earth until the Lord makes them all a footstool under his feet. Consummation. The final act of everything being wrapped up and completed. Every part of this decree being accomplished. And then, of course, glorification. I'm not talking about ours. I'm talking about his. His glorification. When he hands to his Father a completed work in which he has consummated all things, he has accomplished everything that needs to be accomplished, including the salvation of the people and the destruction of those who are wicked, and he gives to his Father a completed work, and there it is. Christ's true preeminence is found in his nature as the one who completes all things. Christ's true preeminence is found in his nature as the one who completes all things, as both, on the one hand, the image of the invisible God, and on the other hand, the God-man. Accomplishing first as the creator and also as the one who would enter in to that creation as the God-man. The creation is for the Son of God to be glorified as the one who consummates all things to the intention of his Father's decree. You see? It's not just for him as though he created it as something that he could say, look, it's mine. Or even that he entered into it, so the creation is a place where he can enter into. But the creation becomes the means by which the entirety of all of God's purposes and plans and decrees and intentions flowing out of his nature is accomplished. It isn't just a place for Christ to enter. It is the totality of what it is that his Father purposed. So the answer to our question, what does this phrase to him mean or for him mean at the end of verse 16? And the answer is all things are created for him, and that everything that is elevates the Son of God. Everything that is elevates the Son of God, who is now the God-man, by being the means through which the fullness of the divine decree is accomplished. Let me simplify Ephesians 1, 7-10 for you. In him, in who? In the Son of God made flesh. In him, we have redemption through his blood. We would stop there, right? Say, well, see, it was created for him to come and redeem us. But listen to what Paul says. He says, making known to us, after he did that, making known to us the mystery of his will, according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ, as a plan for the fullness of time, to unite all things in him, things in heaven and things on earth. What's the decree? The decree of God is to accomplish a sweeping set of goals that the Father had purposed from before the foundation of the world. And we who are redeemed, guess what? We get clued into it. We get to see it. We get to understand it. We look into the face of Christ and we don't just see our Redeemer. We certainly see our Redeemer in him, no doubt. But we don't just see our Redeemer. What do we also see? We see the one who rules over the heavens and the earth. We see the King of the nations, Psalm 2. We see the one who the Father has exalted to the place of the highest status, and that one who sits now at the right hand of his Father is bringing everything in this creation under his command and control. He's bringing everything in this world to be his, because the Father said, it's yours. I'm giving it to you, and you are going to accomplish your glory through it. I'm sorry, I don't buy the eschatologies that say that Jesus is going to come and rescue a few people from this earth and just let it go. This is Christ's world. He is accomplishing all that his Father intended with it, and every single atom that exists in this universe will bow to him. And that is what it means for it to be for him. To him. Everything. Wicked nations, wicked men, wicked angels, judgment, condemnation, exaltation, redemption, all of it exalts the one at the center who is Christ. This creation, both its physical plane and its spiritual plane, along with all the powers he established within it, glorifies him as its creator at the beginning and at its consummation. The beginning in the mind of Almighty God long before this world was created, and at its consummation long after this world is gone, replaced with the new heavens and the new earth. What's the answer to our question? Why is everything for him? Because everything is for him. But to get the phrase for him, it's probably good for us to examine verse 17. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. I want to just grab the first part of that. He is before all things. I think Paul puts this phrase immediately next in order to clarify what he's talking about. Previous verse. The phrase here is autos eimi pro. The word pro meaning ahead, pro. The preposition pro, however, unlike eis, has a very clear semantic domain. It's only used 47 times in the New Testament, so it's very easy to figure out what this little word means. It has simple definitions like before and above and prior. It does have some more complex ones, but they're not much more complex. Things like at the entrance to, ahead of, in front of. Jesus stood in front of the tomb of Lazarus. He was pro. Okay? So unlike eis, its meaning can be affirmed logically. We don't have to try to guess at it contextually. We can infer how it's used in a general sense. So that leads us to a question. What does Paul mean that Jesus, the one who created all things for his glory, right, which we just saw, what does Paul mean that Jesus is before all things? Before all things. From a general understanding of the preposition to what could Paul be referring to? All right, I'm going to go with 3 again. There's a chronological view of this. Before. Okay, before, meaning just in front of, in the sense of before chronologically. Christ is before all things by having preceded them. Well, that would certainly be true. Even as we discussed ad nauseum, Christ was there before creation was there. Chronologically speaking, right? If we assert that time continues as an unlimited stream going backwards, we also say he's before, okay? So chronologically, we can assert that Christ is before all things and before them in time. As the as the image of the invisible God. As we said, the Son obviously was prior to anything that now exists, right? John 1:1. For the Word was God, and the Word was with God, right? So although he entered the world later in time, yet he preceded the world into which he entered chronologically, right? And as I've said, he's the only person in human history that pre-existed his own conception, right? So he was before. So we could look at this when Paul says that, okay, he's before all things. We could assert that he's using it in the most simplistic sense of, yeah, the God-man, the Christ, now known as Jesus, was there before, right? But there's a second possibility, and that is Paul could be speaking of this authoritatively, meaning that Christ is before all things by having a greater authority than them. All right, that's what we talked about when we looked at this, where he created all the various powers, visible and invisible, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, the implication being that he is before those because he created them. He has greater authority than all other authorities. So Paul could be speaking simply authoritatively here. As the creator who established all dominions, he obviously has greater authority than any of them because he created them. Okay, that's reasonable, possible. All authority, all power in the world is derived from him, we asserted when we looked at that verse. No one has authority unless it's given to him. All right? So it could be that Paul is speaking here just chronologically. The Son of God was before all things, or he could be speaking authoritatively and that the Son of God is greater in authority than all things. But let me suggest to you that there's a third possibility, which I like even more, and that is that Christ isn't just chronologically ahead and authoritatively ahead, he is also positionally ahead of all things. He is before all things by leading all elements of the decree to their conclusion. He's before all things because he's leading all things in God's decree to its conclusion. A leader must, by definition, be ahead of those he is leading, correct? He must be ahead of them. We were talking about this in elder meeting the other night. What happens when you push sheep from the back? Where do they go? Everywhere they want to go, right? If you just take a flock and you stand behind them and you give them a nudge, they're just going to run in every direction imaginable. Well, that's not what you want. You're going to wind up having to chase a lot of sheep. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to lead them. You have to get in front of them, and you have to walk in front of them. And as you walk in front of them, they will follow you. Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice, and they know me, and they follow me. All right? So this is probably the idea that to lead implies that others follow you to whatever goal is established. Thus, Jesus, in this case, probably is Paul saying that he is before all things because he's leading all things to their desired outcome. They're for his glory, and that everything God has purposed has its consummation and his glory in him, and he is the one who's out there doing what needs to be done. He is leading the accomplishment of all that the Father has purposed. You think about it like this. It is the Son who created the first man. Now I'm convinced, by the way, it's the second person of the Trinity, the pre-incarnate Son of God, who came and formed the man from the dust of the ground. Well, what does he do? He's taking the lead. He creates a man in an image he wants, and then he eventually comes to be the same. That's a leadership idea. He comes to the earth. What is he doing? He comes to lead the work of redemption. He enters into the world, and he goes and he accomplishes the work of redemption, and he's the first to come forth from the grave. What does Paul say? He's the firstborn from the dead. He's the first one to come out. He's the first one. He leads. And so we know that there's a resurrection because we're following out of the grave the one who came out first. See it? Christ is before all things because it is he who leads in completing the elements of God's decree. Again, all those things we talked about. It is he who creates. It's he who preserves. It's he who was incarnate. It's he who redeems. It's he who is exalted, and so forth. He's leading. He's the one accomplishing these things. He is the one sitting upon the throne of heaven, bringing all things under his majesty and control. He is before all things. All things are created for him or to him, and he is before all things. He is the leader, the head of all things. So in the end, as we consider what Paul says here at the end of verse 16 and the beginning of verse 17, we are reminded of something very important, and it's this. We worship Jesus because he is the intention of all creation. We worship Jesus because he is the intention of all creation. Everything points to him. The center of the church is not us, not even our salvation. It is good that we are saved by Christ. I'm not denying that. And redemption certainly is a very central part to what it is that Christ is doing. The doctrines of redemption take up most of a theology book, no doubt. But it's the totality of Christ, all of what he is accomplishing as the preeminent one, that becomes the focus of the world. We don't worship Jesus just because he gets us. We worship Jesus because he gets the Father. Because he gets the one whose decree was written before the foundation of the earth. He gets him and comes and does what his Father desires. And we who have this revealed to us, right? Ephesians 1. We who know this, we who have seen this, what do? We worship him. We fall down before him because the Father has bestowed upon him everything. The church is about him. Every part of the decree of creation redemption is about him. He's the center of everything. He's before all things because every aspect of this world and all of its purpose is him. Not us. Not our salvation even. Him. It's not about us. It's about him. You see what Paul's doing here? Turning the attention of the Colossian believers to the one. Because it's all about him. As we get deeper and deeper into this Christological passage, we're discovering that Paul is unwavering. He will not waver in his assertion, in his apologetic, that there's nothing more important than Christ. Period. We'll continue the thought next week, Lord willing.